I was driving back from my cousin's wedding, about 3 hours outside the city. It was around 2 a.m. and I was exhausted, but I wanted to get home instead of paying for a hotel. The highway was completely empty. I hadn't seen another car in probably 45 minutes. My gas gauge was getting low, so when I saw the bright lights of a 24-hour station ahead, I felt relieved. The place looked normal enough from the road, but as I pulled up to the pump, something felt off. There were no other customers, which wasn't weird for that time of night, but the parking lot had 3 cars just sitting there with nobody around. 2 were parked near the building and 1 was off to the side in the shadows. All older cars, nothing special, but they'd been sitting there long enough that I could see dew forming on the windshields. I started pumping gas and noticed the attendant inside watching me through the window. He wasn't doing anything else, just standing there staring. When I looked back at him, he didn't look away or wave or anything, just kept watching. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was bored or half asleep. The pump was taking forever to fill my tank, and I started getting more nervous. I glanced around and noticed that all 3 parked cars had people sitting in them. I could see silhouettes in the driver's seats, but nobody was moving. They were just sitting there in the dark. Who sits in their car at a gas station at 2 a.m. without getting out? That's when I heard footsteps on gravel behind me. I turned around and saw a guy walking toward me from the direction of the shadowed car. Middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He was walking slowly, like he was trying not to make noise, but the gravel gave him away. "Hey," he called out when he saw me looking. "You know how to get to Route 9 from here?" I pointed toward the highway and said it was about 10 miles north, but something about his voice didn't sound right, like he was nervous or trying too hard to sound casual. He nodded and said thanks, but instead of walking back to his car, he moved closer to the pump area. The gas finally finished, and I hurried to put the nozzle back. As I was screwing my gas cap on, the guy was suddenly right next to my car, way closer than he needed to be for a conversation. I could see him better now under the pump lights. He looked like he hadn't slept in days and kept glancing back toward the building. "Actually," he said, "could you give me a ride to Route 9? My car won't start." I looked over at his car and could clearly see someone still sitting in the driver's seat. If his car wouldn't start, why was someone sitting in it? And if he needed a ride, why didn't he just ask the attendant to call someone? "Sorry, I'm not going that way," I lied, backing toward my driver's door. That's when I noticed the other 2 cars had started their engines. I could see the exhaust in the cold air, but their headlights were still off. The guy stepped closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. "Come on, it's just a few miles. I'll give you gas money." He was standing between me and my door now, and I realized I'd have to push past him to get in my car. "I really can't," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I started walking around the back of my car toward the passenger side, hoping to get in that way. But as I moved, he moved too, keeping himself between me and the car. That's when the attendant came outside. He wasn't wearing the uniform of the gas station brand, just regular clothes, and he walked straight toward us without saying anything. The guy who'd been talking to me looked back at him and nodded slightly. My heart started racing. I realized this wasn't random. These people knew each other, and whatever was happening, I was supposed to be part of it. I thought about all those missing person cases you hear about, people who just disappear on road trips and nobody ever finds them. I bolted toward the building, hoping there might be other people inside, or that I could lock myself in a bathroom and call 911. But as I ran past the windows, I could see the place was empty. The attendant had been the only person inside, and now he was outside. The guy behind me was running too, and I could hear at least one of the cars moving in the parking lot. I made it to my car and dove through the passenger door, scrambling over the center console to get to the driver's seat. I'd left my keys in the ignition like an idiot, but thankfully the engine started right away. As I threw it in reverse, the attendant was standing right behind my car. I honked and he moved, but slowly, like he was buying time for something. The other guy was banging on my passenger window, trying to open the door. One of the parked cars had pulled up to block the exit back to the highway. I gunned it toward the side of the building where there was a gap between the dumpster and the fence. My car barely fit, scraping against the fence as I squeezed through. I could hear shouting behind me and saw headlights following, but I made it to a back road that connected to the highway about a mile down. I drove straight to the next town and sat in a well-lit McDonald's parking lot until sunrise, shaking and trying to process what had just happened. I called the state police and gave them the location, but when they checked it out the next day, they said the station was closed and looked like it had been for months. The pumps didn't work and there was no attendant. I still don't understand how I was able to pump gas if the place was closed or who those people were. But I'm certain that if I hadn't run when I did, I wouldn't have made it home that night. I've never stopped at an isolated gas station after midnight again, and I always keep my tank above half full when I'm driving long distances. I was driving back from my girlfriend's place around midnight after we'd gotten into a pretty bad fight. She lived about 2 hours away in a small town, and I was angry and not thinking straight when I left. I'd made the drive dozens of times, but that night I was distracted and took the wrong exit off the interstate. I realized my mistake after about 10 minutes when nothing looked familiar. The road was narrow and winding through farmland with no streetlights. I figured I'd just keep going until I found another road that would connect back to the highway, but after another 20 minutes, I was completely lost. My phone had no signal out there. That's when I saw headlights behind me. They'd appeared suddenly. I hadn't seen them before when I'd been checking my mirrors. The car was keeping its distance, but following every turn I made. At first, I thought it might be someone else who was lost, but when I slowed down to let them pass, they slowed down too. I started getting nervous and made a random right turn onto an even smaller road. The headlights followed. Then I made a left at the next intersection, and they followed again. There was no way this was coincidental. Whoever was behind me was deliberately tailing me. The road I was on now was basically a dirt path between cornfields. No houses, no other roads, just endless rows of corn on both sides that were taller than my car. My headlights could only reach maybe 50 feet ahead before the road curved again. I was completely trapped. If I stopped or broke down, there was nowhere to run and no one to help. I tried to speed up to get some distance between us, but the car behind me sped up too. When I slowed down, they slowed down. They were staying exactly the same distance behind me, no matter what I did. It felt like they were playing with me, like a cat with a mouse. After about 10 more minutes of this, I came to a fork in the road. There was no sign indicating which way led back to civilization. I hesitated for a second, then took the left fork. The headlights behind me went right. I felt relieved for about 30 seconds until I realized I could still see their lights through the corn. The roads must run parallel to each other. Then I saw the lights turning. They were coming back toward my road through what must have been a connecting path between the fields. Sure enough, the headlights appeared behind me again within a couple minutes. This time they were closer than before, maybe only 20 feet behind my bumper. I could see it was a dark pickup truck, but I couldn't make out the driver or the license plate. I was starting to panic. I'd been driving through these back roads for over an hour and hadn't seen a single house or business or even another car besides the one following me. My gas was getting low and I had no idea where I was. Worse, whoever was behind me clearly knew these roads better than I did. The truck started getting even closer until it was right on my bumper. If I had to brake suddenly, they would rear-end me for sure. I could see the outline of someone in the driver's seat, but they had their high beams on, so I couldn't see their face in my mirror. Then they started flashing their lights at me. Long flashes, like they were trying to signal something. I had no idea what they wanted, but I wasn't about to stop and find out. I pressed harder on the gas pedal. That's when they started honking. Long, sustained honks every few seconds. The sound was terrifying in the middle of nowhere. It felt like they were announcing my presence to someone else, like maybe there were more people involved. The road curved sharply to the right, and I had to slow down. As soon as I did, the truck pulled into the left lane like they were going to pass me. But instead of passing, they pulled up right next to me and stayed there. We were driving side by side down this narrow dirt road at about 40 miles per hour. I looked over and could see the driver clearly for the first time. It was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing a baseball cap. He was staring right at me with this weird expression. Not angry, but intense, like he was studying me. When our eyes met, he smiled and pointed ahead. I looked forward and saw that the road was ending. There was a gate across it with signs that said private property and no trespassing. Beyond the gate was just darkness. The truck driver was still pointing and smiling. I realized he'd been herding me toward this dead end the whole time. He knew exactly where these roads led, and he'd been forcing me to take the turns that would bring me here. I slammed on my brakes and threw the car in reverse, but the truck had already moved behind me to block my escape. The driver got out and started walking toward my car. He was tall and thin, wearing work clothes and heavy boots. He moved slowly, like he had all the time in the world. I laid on my horn, hoping someone might hear it, but we were miles from anything. The man reached my driver's side window and tapped on it with his knuckles. When I didn't respond, he tried the door handle. Thank God I'd locked the doors. "Open up," he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "I just want to talk to you." I shook my head and gripped the steering wheel tighter. He walked around to the passenger side and tried that door too. Then he went to the back of my car, and I heard him doing something near my trunk. I put the car in drive and floored it toward the ditch beside the road, hoping I could get around him somehow. But my front wheel got stuck in the soft dirt, and the car wouldn't move. The engine was racing, but I wasn't going anywhere. The man appeared at my window again, still smiling. "Looks like you're stuck," he said. "Why don't you let me help you?" That's when I heard another car approaching. I looked in my mirror and saw headlights coming down the road toward us. The man looked back too, and his expression changed. He quickly walked back to his truck and got in. The approaching car was a police cruiser. It pulled up next to us, and an officer got out with a flashlight. The man in the truck rolled down his window and started talking to the cop like they were old friends. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they talked for several minutes while I sat there with my heart pounding. Finally, the officer walked over to my car, and I rolled down my window about an inch. He was middle-aged, with a thick mustache, and seemed friendly enough. "You folks having some trouble out here?" he asked. I started to explain about getting lost and being followed, but he cut me off. "Yeah, Jim here says you've been driving erratically through his property. These are private roads, son. You're trespassing. I looked back at the truck driver, Jim, who was still smiling at me. I realized the cop wasn't there to help me. Maybe he was in on whatever was happening, or maybe Jim had fed him some story about me being drunk or suspicious. "I'm sorry, officer," I said. "I just got lost trying to find the highway. If you could just point me in the right direction, I'll leave right away." The officer looked back at Jim, who nodded. "Tell you what," the cop said. "Follow me out of here and I'll get you back to the interstate, but don't let me catch you back on these roads again." I was so relieved I almost cried. The officer got back in his cruiser and waited while Jim moved his truck out of the way. I managed to get my car out of the ditch and followed the police car back through the maze of dirt roads. 20 minutes later, we were back at the interstate. The officer pulled over at the on-ramp, and I stopped behind him. He got out and walked back to my car. "Drive safe now," he said, "and next time stick to the main roads." I thanked him and got on the highway as fast as I could. It wasn't until I was about 50 miles away that I started thinking about what had really happened back there. How had Jim known I would end up at that dead end? Why had he been following me for so long before making his move? And how convenient was it that a police officer just happened to show up at the exact right moment? I never reported it because I wasn't sure what to report. Maybe Jim really was just a property owner who didn't like trespassers. Maybe the cop really was just doing his job. But something about the whole situation felt wrong, like I'd walked into the middle of something I wasn't supposed to see. I've never taken that exit again, and I always make sure my phone is charged and my gas tank is full before driving anywhere at night. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that police car hadn't shown up when it did. I was driving back from a job interview about 4 hours from home. The interview had run late, and by the time I got on the road, it was already past 9 p.m. I'd driven this route before, but never at night, and I was getting tired after the first 2 hours. Around 11:30 p.m., I pulled into a rest area to use the bathroom and grabbed some coffee from the vending machines. The place was almost empty. Just a couple semis parked in the truck section and one other car near the building. The parking lot lights were dim and half of them seemed to be burned out. I parked close to the entrance and went inside. The bathroom was typical for a highway rest stop. Not great, but clean enough. When I came out, there was a guy standing by the vending machines who hadn't been there before. He was probably in his 50s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, and he nodded at me when I walked past. "Coffee machine's broken," he said, pointing at the machine I was heading toward. "Been trying to get it to work for 10 minutes. I thanked him and tried it anyway. He was right. It took my money, but nothing came out. The guy was still standing there watching me, which felt a little weird, but I figured he was just being friendly. "There's another machine around the corner," he said. "By the information boards. That one works fine." I walked around to where he was pointing and found the other machine. As I was putting my money in, I heard footsteps behind me. The guy had followed me around the corner, even though there was nothing else over there except some tourism brochures and a payphone. "You heading north?" he asked. "Roads get pretty dark up ahead. Not many places to stop for gas." I told him I was familiar with the route and had plenty of gas, but thanks for the warning. The coffee machine was taking forever to make my drink, and the guy just stood there making small talk. He asked where I was coming from, where I was going, if I lived alone. Normal conversation, but something about his tone made me uncomfortable. When my coffee finally came out, I said I needed to get back on the road. He nodded and said he was heading out too. I walked back toward the parking lot and noticed he was following about 10 feet behind me. When I got to my car, he kept walking toward the other car I'd seen when I arrived, an older sedan parked near the building. I got in and started my engine, but as I was backing out, I saw in my rearview mirror that the guy was just standing by his car, not getting in. He was watching me leave. It struck me as odd, but I figured maybe he was making a phone call or something. I got back on the highway and had been driving for maybe 20 minutes when I noticed headlights behind me. They were keeping pace with me, staying the same distance back no matter if I sped up or slowed down. The headlights looked like they could be from the sedan I'd seen at the rest stop. I tried to get a better look in my mirror, but it was too dark to see the actual car. I switched to the right lane to let them pass, but they switched lanes too, staying directly behind me. When I moved back to the left lane, they followed again. This went on for another 15 minutes. I started getting really nervous because there was hardly any other traffic on the road. If something happened, there would be no one around to help. I decided to take the next exit and see if they would follow me off the highway. The exit led to a small town with just a few businesses, a gas station, a diner, and some closed shops. I pulled into the gas station even though I didn't need gas, hoping the car would keep going. But sure enough, they followed me into the parking lot. The gas station was open, but looked deserted. There was one attendant inside, a young guy who looked like he was half asleep behind the counter. I got out and went inside, thinking I'd be safer around other people, even if it was just one person. I pretended to browse the snacks while watching through the windows. The sedan had parked at the far end of the lot, and I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, but they weren't getting out. After a few minutes, I bought a pack of gum just to have a reason for being there and went back to my car. As soon as I started driving toward the highway entrance, the sedan started following me again. This time they were closer, maybe only 3 car lengths behind. When I got back on the highway, they stayed right behind me in the same lane. I was starting to panic. Whoever this was had been following me for almost an hour now, and we were in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. I tried to think of what to do. The next major town was still 30 miles away, and there weren't any more exits before then except for some rural roads that would probably make the situation worse. That's when the car behind me started flashing their headlights. Long flashes, over and over again. I had no idea what they were trying to communicate, but it felt threatening. Then they started honking their horn in short bursts. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, pushing my speed up to almost 80. The sedan matched my speed easily, staying right behind me and continuing to flash their lights and honk. It felt like they were trying to force me to pull over or make me panic and crash. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Up ahead, there was a car stopped on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. As I got closer, I could see it was another sedan, similar to the one following me. There was someone standing beside it, waving at me to pull over. I realized this was coordinated. The guy at the rest stop had been signaling to someone, probably telling them which direction I was heading and what kind of car I was driving. The car following me was herding me toward this second car, and if I stopped to help what looked like a stranded motorist, I'd be trapped between them. I stayed in the left lane and drove past the stopped car without slowing down. In my mirror, I could see the person on the shoulder running back to their car. Within a minute, both cars were behind me, one directly behind the other. Now I was really terrified. 2 cars full of people were chasing me down a dark highway in the middle of the night, and I had no way to call for help. My gas gauge was getting lower, and I knew I couldn't outrun them indefinitely. The cars behind me were taking turns pulling up closer to my bumper, then dropping back. It felt like they were playing with me, seeing how scared they could make me. Every few minutes, one of them would flash their lights or honk their horn. Then I saw the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen, the lights of a 24-hour truck stop about 2 miles ahead. It was one of those big travel centers with a restaurant and showers for truckers. There would be people there, and security cameras, and someone I could call for help. I took the exit and pulled up right in front of the main building where it was well lit. The 2 cars followed me into the parking lot, but didn't park near me. Instead, they drove slowly through the lot like they were looking for something, then parked way in the back near the truck parking area. I ran inside and found the manager, a woman in her 40s who looked like she'd been working all night. I told her what had happened and asked if I could call the police. She let me use the phone behind the counter and stayed with me while I made the call. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, 2 officers in separate patrol cars. By then, the 2 sedans were gone. The officers took my statement and said they'd patrol the area, but without license plate numbers or better descriptions of the people involved, there wasn't much they could do. One of the officers offered to follow me for a few miles when I was ready to leave, which made me feel a lot better. I waited another hour to make sure the coast was clear, then got back on the highway with the patrol car behind me. I made it home without any more problems, but I was shaking for hours afterward. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I'd stopped to help that stranded motorist, or if there hadn't been a truck stop when I needed it. I reported the incident to the state police the next day and gave them the location of the rest stop where it all started. They said they'd had a few similar reports over the past year, people being followed from that same rest area late at night. They thought it might be connected to some kind of robbery or carjacking operation. I don't drive that route anymore, especially not at night, and I never stop at isolated rest areas after dark. The whole thing still gives me chills when I think about how organized it was. The guy inside scoping out targets, the coordinated chase, the fake breakdown ahead. If I hadn't stayed calm and found that truck stop, I honestly don't know if I would have made it home that night.